The plan was simple. My buddies and I decided to go camping by the lake. It was supposed to be a relaxing weekend away from the hustle and bustle of the city. We packed our gear, loaded up the truck, and hit the road early Saturday morning. The weather was perfect, and our spirits were high. We arrived at the campsite around noon. The lake was stunning, with its clear blue water and the forest surrounding it. We set up our tents and made a small fire pit. By late afternoon, we were settled in and ready to enjoy the great outdoors. After a hearty meal cooked over the fire, we decided to take a short hike before the sun went down. The trail led us through dense woods, the trees casting long shadows in the fading light. We joked and laughed, not paying much attention to where we were going. As dusk fell, we realized we had wandered off the main trail. The forest seemed denser, and the path we were on became less distinct. We turned back, trying to retrace our steps, but everything looked the same. The realization that we were lost crept in slowly. We tried to stay calm and used our phone's GPS, but the signal was weak. After what felt like hours of wandering, we stumbled upon an old, run-down cabin. It looked abandoned, but it was shelter. We decided to stay there for the night and find our way back in the morning. The door creaked loudly as we pushed it open. Inside, it was dark and musty, with old furniture covered in dust and cobwebs. We made a small fire in the fireplace and huddled around it, trying to shake off the chill. The mood was somber, and we barely spoke. Exhaustion eventually took over, and one by one, we drifted off to sleep. I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange sound. It was a faint scratching, like nails on wood. I looked around, but the fire had died down, and the room was pitch black. I could barely make out the shapes of my friends sleeping nearby. The scratching grew louder and seemed to be coming from outside. I shook my buddy Dave awake. "Do you hear that?" I whispered. He listened for a moment, then nodded, his eyes wide with fear. We grabbed our flashlights and slowly approached the door. The scratching stopped as we got closer. I took a deep breath and swung the door open. The forest outside was silent and still, bathed in the pale light of the moon. There was nothing there. We stepped out, shining our flashlights around, but saw no signs of anything unusual. Just as we were about to head back inside, we heard it again, the scratching, but this time it was coming from the back of the cabin. We crept around the side, hearts pounding. As we turned the corner, our flashlights caught something moving. A figure darted into the shadows, too fast for us to see clearly. It looked human but moved in a strange, jerky way. We stood frozen for a moment, unsure of what to do. Suddenly, a blood-curdling scream pierced the night. It was coming from inside the cabin. We ran back, our minds racing with fear. Bursting through the door, we found our friend Mike sitting up, his face pale and eyes wide with terror. "Something grabbed me," he stammered. "It pulled at my sleeping bag." We checked the room but found nothing. The rest of the night was a blur of fear and confusion. We kept watch in shifts, too scared to sleep. Every sound, every shadow put us on edge. The scratching continued intermittently, but we never saw what was causing it. At first light, we packed up and left the cabin as fast as we could. Using the rising sun as our guide, we managed to find our way back to the main trail and eventually to our campsite. We packed up and drove home in silence, the events of the night replaying in our minds. To this day, none of us can explain what happened that night. We never went back to that lake, and we rarely talk about the experience. But every now and then, when I'm alone in the dark, I hear that scratching sound and feel a chill run down my spine. It was supposed to be a simple camping trip, a quick getaway to relax. My friend, Alex, and I had both been swamped with work, and this seemed like the perfect chance to unwind. We decided to go to a secluded spot in the woods, away from the usual crowded campgrounds. The drive was long, but the scenery was beautiful. We reached the dirt road that led to our campsite in the late afternoon. The trees were tall and dense, making it feel like we were entering another world. The air was crisp, and the only sounds were the rustling leaves and our own footsteps. After setting up the tent and starting a small fire, we sat back and enjoyed the peace. We cooked some hot dogs and shared a few beers, laughing about old times. As the sun set, the forest grew darker and the shadows longer. It was quiet, almost too quiet. Around 10 p.m., we decided to call it a night. We climbed into the tent and zipped up the flap. The ground was hard and uneven, but we were tired enough to fall asleep quickly. I woke up a few hours later. Something didn't feel right. I lay still, listening. At first, there was nothing but the usual sounds of the forest. Then, I heard it, a faint rustling, like someone or something was moving outside the tent. I nudged Alex. "Do you hear that?" He groaned and turned over. "It's probably just a deer or something. Go back to sleep." But I couldn't shake the feeling that we weren't alone. The rustling grew louder, closer. My heart pounded as I strained to hear any sign of danger. I slowly unzipped the tent flap just enough to peek outside. The fire had died down to embers, casting an eerie glow around our campsite. I couldn't see anyone, but the feeling of being watched was overwhelming. I ducked back inside and zipped the tent shut. "Alex, wake up," I whispered urgently. "Something's out there." He sat up, more awake now. "What are you talking about?" Before I could answer, there was a loud snap, like a twig breaking underfoot. We both froze. The sound was close, too close. Alex grabbed a flashlight and shone it through the thin fabric of the tent. The beam of light cut through the darkness, but revealed nothing. "Maybe it's a raccoon," he suggested, though he didn't sound convinced. We waited, barely breathing. The seconds dragged on. Then, the rustling started again, followed by another snap. It was definitely not an animal. I could feel the blood draining from my face. Whoever or whatever was out there was circling our tent. Alex and I exchanged a look. We needed to get out of there. He grabbed a pocket knife and I reached for the car keys. We unzipped the tent as quietly as we could and stepped outside. The cold air hit my face, and I shivered. The forest was pitch black beyond the small circle of dying firelight. Alex held the flashlight steady, sweeping it around the campsite. Nothing. We inched our way to the car, every twig snap and rustle making my heart race. Just as we reached the car, we heard it, a low, guttural growl. I whipped around, trying to locate the source. The flashlight beam fell on a pair of eyes, glowing in the darkness. Alex fumbled with the car keys, his hands shaking. The growling grew louder, more menacing. The eyes moved closer, and we could make out a shadowy figure behind them. It was too big to be a raccoon or any other forest animal. "Get in, get in," I yelled, yanking the car door open. We dove inside, locking the doors behind us. Alex started the engine, and the headlights flashed on, illuminating the creature. It was a large, scruffy man, his clothes torn and dirty. He shielded his eyes from the light, growling again. Alex floored the gas pedal, and we sped down the dirt road, the man's growl fading into the distance. We didn't stop until we reached the nearest town, our hearts still pounding in our chests. We never went back for our tent or any of our gear. The memory of that night was enough to keep us away. What was supposed to be a relaxing trip turned into a nightmare, and we were lucky to get out alive. I had always loved camping. There was something about the quiet, the isolation, and the connection with nature that made me feel at peace. So, when my friends suggested a weekend trip to a remote part of the national forest, I jumped at the chance. We set out on a Friday afternoon, 4 of us packed into my friend Tom's SUV. There was Tom, his girlfriend Lisa, our buddy Mike, and me. The drive was long, but we were in high spirits, talking about everything and nothing. As we got deeper into the forest, our cell phones lost signal, and the roads became rougher. By the time we reached the campsite, it was late afternoon. We unpacked quickly and set up our tents near a small, clear stream. The area was beautiful, untouched, and serene. We spent the evening around the campfire, roasting marshmallows and telling stories. As night fell, the forest around us grew dark and still. The only sounds were the crackling of the fire and the occasional rustle of leaves in the breeze. It was perfect. Later, we retreated to our tents. I shared a tent with Mike, while Tom and Lisa shared another. I fell asleep quickly, lulled by the distant hoots of an owl and the gentle murmur of the stream. I woke up in the middle of the night to a strange sound. It was a low, rhythmic thumping. I lay still, listening, trying to figure out what it was. It didn't sound like an animal, and it was too steady to be something natural. I glanced at Mike, but he was sound asleep. Curiosity got the better of me. I grabbed my flashlight and unzipped the tent as quietly as I could. The night was pitch black, but the sound was clearer now, coming from the direction of the stream. I stepped out of the tent, shivering a little in the cool night air, and walked toward the sound. As I got closer, the thumping stopped. I swept the beam of my flashlight over the area, but saw nothing unusual, just the stream, the trees, and the underbrush. I stood there for a moment, straining to hear anything else, but there was only silence. Feeling a bit foolish, I turned back to the tent. The next morning, I told the others about the noise. They shrugged it off, suggesting it was probably an animal or the wind. We spent the day hiking and exploring, enjoying the beauty of the forest. By the time we got back to camp, we were tired but happy. That night, the thumping returned. This time, it woke everyone up. We sat in our tents, whispering to each other, trying to figure out what it could be. Tom suggested it might be a deer or a bear, but Mike shook his head. No way. It sounds too regular, too human. We decided to investigate together. Armed with flashlights and a couple of pocket knives, we followed the sound. As we approached the stream, the noise stopped again. We stood there, scanning the darkness, feeling a growing sense of unease. Suddenly, Lisa gasped and pointed. There, on the opposite bank of the stream, was a figure. It was barely visible in the weak light of our flashlights, but it was there, standing motionless, watching us. We froze, our hearts pounding. "Who's there?" Tom called out. There was no answer. The figure didn't move. We backed away slowly, not taking our eyes off the figure. When we reached our campsite, we quickly packed up our gear. No one wanted to stay another night. We drove back to civilization, the silence in the car heavy with unspoken fear. We never figured out who or what was out there. Maybe it was just another camper curious about us. Or maybe it was something else, something we didn't want to know about. All I know is that I haven't been camping since, and I don't think I ever will again. The woods, once a place of peace and beauty, now hold a darkness I can't forget.